Yeah, I'll go ahead and say, I'll say it and someone can, one of the actual committee members can adopt it. So what you're moving is that the proposed agenda of this body constitutes essential business and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and well-being of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
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 Great. We will proceed electronically. Okay. So we'll start with the first resolution of our performing rights organization or performing arts organizations.
Can I be recognized?
Absolutely.
So when I'm looking through this, I feel like we need to further define the performing arts, because I feel like that's going to open it up to it's too broad. Because what I would like to add is like independently owned. I would like to add a cap of $5 million in annual revenue. Because, for example, like nothing against Ryman Auditorium, but Ryman Auditorium is not going anywhere. It's owned by a huge publicly traded company. But the way this is worded right now, it opens it up to that. Also, places that operate in multiple states. And so not necessarily publicly traded, but they're bigger than what we're trying to really target and save. So the other thing I'm worried about is that other places will say, oh, we're performing arts because they have a stage, but really they're a bar with a stage or, you know, something like that. I mean, performing arts is just super broad. So I really want to kind of hone in on what that language should be. And so I have a suggestion. I'm happy to email it because it's a little bit long, but I do want to add specific language about a $5 million cap in annual revenue, but also that concert tickets, admissions, and or cover charges are integral to and required for entry at least 50% of the time the facility is open to the public. And that other ancillary services such as alcohol, food, merchandise are subsidiary or dependent upon live music performances. And that way, you know, it just kind of further just defines who we are truly trying to target and save. And I'm open to other suggestions.
Yeah, I would love to chime in. Courtney, I agree with your comments because as I read it, I thought it was too broad and a lot of different organizations could get in the mix. I actually thought our overall restrictions that we were using for small businesses were also going to apply to these organizations. And that includes not being cited for violating health orders and a revenue cap, et cetera. Now, whether it's the smaller revenue cap we have for other small business support or whether it's the $5 million you mentioned, I'm not quite sure. I thought our goal was to get to the small ones that really are in danger of going under. But I think that's something we need to make sure we're narrowly tailoring it because it's not a huge amount of money in the scheme of things. Right.
And the reason I went to $5 million is specifically because of Cannery Ballroom that fit all the other qualifications. The problem is they have 3 leases under one business. And so when you add those 3, and so you can't do each lease separately, it's still the same company. And so they're $5 million. Everything else is underneath that. But that $5 million cap is going to cut out a lot of what we're trying to avoid. But I didn't want to exclude them because they are independently owned. And like I said, they fit all of the other criteria. And then what was your other?
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing with you. One thing that crossed my mind is we have a lot of organizations that are not venues that, you know, actually help with the staging, the sound, all the different elements of putting on live performances, many of which are small and independent. And I just wanted to clarify whether our goal was to try to encompass that more broadly, because I thought we were trying to get at sort of the entire spectrum of folks really dependent on live performances, not just the venues. But I did want to raise that issue before we started defining it further.
Yeah, I think a lot of these venues have their own staging, like in-house staging, lighting, and all of that, so they would be considered an employee. I don't know. That's a great question. You know, this is why this gets so complicated, is because there's so much that goes into it. And, you know, my original concern was just keeping the venue, because if the venue goes away, everything else goes away too. And so that's the priority, or it was with mine, but I understand your point. I'm wondering how much that would open that up to, where that $2 million just goes so quickly. I don't know the answer, to be honest. I guess open that up to the rest of the committee on what their thoughts are.
I have a question and now a second question because of that. If you did open it up to some support, sound and light companies, if you will, and put a similar set of cap on it, Nashville based, not to exceed X in top line revenues, and maybe it's less than the venue itself, you're probably looking at only, 8 to 10 other venues, areas possible that could fulfill that, but they are in need. And about half the venues that we're looking to help use those outside agencies, for a lot of reasons. Right. And then the second is, when you mentioned earlier, though you didn't read it, not operating in other states. Look at Marathon Music Group, for example. I think they operate a similar venue in Kansas City. Our intent to knock them out. They're really safe here. So maybe it's less than X, or you stay with the $5 million cap. They're based in Nashville.
Right. I'm happy to open it up to well, then if you open it up to sound and lighting, and you don't want to just do sound and lighting, because there's other businesses that support venues putting things on. There's tablecloth companies, and there's this, that, and the other. How do you separate that out? I'm wondering if we're getting too, because those other small businesses they probably fall under the category of micro or small businesses that we're addressing in the $3 million. I'm thinking that we need, for this $2 million, we were really focusing on the venues themselves. So because they are truly the ones that are the most at risk. So now that I'm thinking of it that way, since we do have this second resolution addressing small micro businesses, I think that's where we should send those folks, and keep this $2 million specifically to independently owned venues here. Sure.
I think that the second round of the state's small business expansion is what's going to capture those folks, because we tried to include groups like caterers. So, for example, if you had a live music venue, and instead of serving food in there that was produced in the kitchen, you had a caterer to come in, and they were having to shut down because the venue was shut down. That second round was designed to capture them. So I think the other ancillary services will be captured by, even though they may not have been spelled out specifically, will be captured by that expansion we did at the state level.
Yeah. I'm specifically asking someone about Marathon. Marathon owns 3 venues. One of them is out of state, but it is locally owned. Right. So if they own 3 venues, are those 3 venues separate businesses that each of the 3 of them could apply?
I think what we're trying to get at is that we would like to fund the venues that are here in Nashville.
Right. Yes.
So the ones that are in another city, we would like those cities to take care of those.
Exactly.
So only the ones that are here locally would be qualified, would be eligible.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. My point was, like, as far as Marathon goes, if we say not businesses that don't operate in other states, does that knock Marathon out?
Right. I think the wording has to be more, has to be written so that it's to support Nashville operations. of
Yeah, I
independently
think it needs to
owned.
be venue specific. Yeah.
Yeah, venues specifically operating in Davidson County. Yeah, Marathon is going to be hard because they do have high revenues, but they're one entity. So each of the three venues here in Nashville are one entity.
But I think they to our point that we were discussing last week, they are able to run it up to the cap. Like they may not be able to fully make themselves whole from a standpoint of what it would do for them, right, in terms of just percentage, but they still are accessing it. Are you saying that the 5 million is the number that is meant to keep others from coming in? That 5 million is where it needs to be, so they're still captured in there. I think I'm understanding that correctly, but I just want to make sure.
That number, to include Marathon, that number would have to go up to $7 million of annual revenue.
But is the 7 for all 3 locations?
Correct, because they're all
that-
one entity, just like Cannery is. They have 3 leases, but it's all under one company. So the company itself has total revenue. And so that's, they can't apply separately, and neither will Marathon be able to, because it's all Marathon Music Works or whatever the business is, even though they've got 3 venues. So
But I think sorry, Courtney, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I think what we should just do is make it venue specific applications, right? So the Cannery may have 3 locations. They should be able to, with they as well as Pathways, if they're going to be the one administering these types of loans, they should be able to sit down with them and look at hard costs all tied to an address, because that's what we're trying to save, right? Whether it's taxes,
Right.
whether it's a lease or mortgage payment, whether it's utilities, all of those things have an address tied to them. And so we should maybe figure out how to state it to where it's an address specific application.
Yep. Yeah, that would solve Marathon for sure. Yeah. I think Cannery has they possibly have the same address. Maybe it's different suites, which I guess that makes it a different
They
address.
do. Mercy Lounge and Cannery are top to bottom, and then I can't think of what their third is, but
Well, so maybe the brilliant legal minds can figure out like how to address specific or lease specific. I don't know. That's a legal question.
They have different venue names. It could be venue specific. Would that work?
I think as long as Pathways is understanding what we're trying, our criteria, then that's fine. I mean, I think that would cover it.
yeah.
It might be possible to do venue specific ticket receipts or something like that, because Mercy Lounge would have a separate number than Cannery Row would. And is the other one Highlight? I can't remember.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Venue specific, lease specific, address specific, any of that I think would work.
Can I ask the committee so I thought back to a little bit what Sarah first brought up. I just want to make sure that we're clear that if we are only talking venues, then we may not want to use the word performing arts organizations, because that is broad. If the committee really is only trying to get at the venues, then we might want to change that to just say, music venues as documented. And then Courtney, I thought you had some wording that was very helpful to say, as documented by, you said something like over 50% of the revenue is from ticket sale, concert ticket sales or whatever. I mean, that would define then a music venue.
I think to Sarah, what she said in the meeting, she was also trying to target the Nashville Symphony.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's just more other. It wasn't so much the symphony in particular, but it was just, I feel like there are a lot of performing arts organizations that are struggling. There are artist organizations, there are support organizations. And so to just pick venues and say you win and everything else that supports the arts community seemed a little bit odd to me. Now, it may be that we feel like the venues need all the support and these other organizations do not. But it just seemed to me that we might want to leave it a little bit broader than that because it seemed really, really narrow.
Well, that was my original understanding, that we were trying to leave it broad, but what we're doing right now is getting very narrow.
Right.
So
Well,
I just wanted us to be sure before we get too far down and then say, oh, well, we've just now we've excluded by doing
So
concert
this is
tickets. Go ahead.
so this is Ed. This is why I think when I was trying to ask the question at the committee level was the groups that we're talking about now, these support and auxiliary services around live music and performing arts. Aren't they qualified as small businesses to achieve the funding in the other pot that's also up for resolution? I feel like we are not excluding them. We may be excluding them from this venue more hard asset specific funding pot, but they're not excluded from the other one. And I think that may be what Representative Love is saying as well, is that we're trying to make the other one be more of a catch-all. And that's why my skew towards wanting that amount of money to be larger in the other bucket is because that's the one that doesn't have as many restrictions. I think this funding is almost, we're going to save our live music and performing arts venues. Like that's what I felt this resolution was about. And the other is to make sure we adequately fund other small businesses, regardless of exactly what their industry may be. And I think those organizations would fall within that category.
I totally agree with you. And then I think the issue is, we've got $2 million for just the venues, and then we've got 1.3 for all other small businesses at this point, including the support organizations. And so,
Yeah,
I think the issue is whether that's how we want to allocate our priorities. I'm all for supporting the venues, and I want to make a very strong statement about our venues. I just know that there are a lot of other struggling organizations that rely on live performance that have needs as well.
my thought process as far as being venue specific is that the venues themselves are the nucleus of the cell. And so if the nucleus dies, the cell dies. And so making sure that they make it through on the other side of this is why it was being very, very specific. I agree. That all these ancillary businesses that are support type businesses can fall into the other resolution and the other allocation. I've always thought that it needed to be more. But one thing that we can keep in mind is that we are doing biweekly reporting on that. And if it's being depleted very, very quickly, we've got our infrastructure in place for that. And we could allocate another $1 million or whatever, even if it's in 3 weeks or a month or something for the rest of, the small/micro business community.
and when we get to talking about the small business resolution, I do have another amendment suggestion to increase the amount, but I'll wait until we get to that.
So I guess we just need to decide as a committee, is this $2 million that we've allocated specifically for venues? Is that the will of the committee, or?
Do you all want to take a quick vote?
So what's the vote specifically?
Are we addressing music venues only?
Okay.
So that we can, focus our language in the resolution, or are we trying to leave it broad so that if there's an organization that we just haven't thought of that may come forward, that they would be eligible, that we don't preclude anybody?
I was in the session last week when we met, and the week prior when we had the conversation with the music venues, that our goal was to, for a better word, keep the building open so that they could return back to live performances at some later date, which is why we considered their operating cost pre-COVID and in COVID to determine how much they need to have as a cap. And so I think that we should probably stick with the original plan, which is keep the live music venues open, whether that's giving the money to the person who rents it or the person who owns the building and has to pay their mortgage or their other bills and utilities and that sort of thing. So I think we should stick with the whole piece of the music venue itself.
Do you all want to open that up for vote and make a motion, Representative Love?
I'm sorry, yes.
Let's review what we're saying, that $2 million could go toward just the wrong page.
I'm sorry, say that again. There.
I think what we're saying is we're going to allocate $2 million for music venues only. And I guess what I'd like to review is just what the restrictions and requirements are.
I agree with Representative Love that we stick to the $100,000 cap per business and keep the restriction to music venues. Then that will satisfy what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and then we can get very specific, you know, in honing in on what we're actually doing, what we're actually targeting. I agree. So did Representative Love make that motion to do a vote?
Yeah, I can make the motion, but I don't want to cut off discussion for some other folks want to talk.
Well, we can have discussion after the motion is made. You're not cutting off discussion.
All right. I move that we would have our allocation be specifically for music venues and include the qualifications and restrictions we stated in our last meeting, and include some of the other ones that were listed this morning.
Okay.
Seconded.
I hear a second. Is there any discussion?
Let me ask, just for purposes of getting the motion in proper order, do we need to list out those other restrictions so we're clear about it, and some of the ones that were stated this morning?
The ones that are already in the resolution, I haven't heard anybody want to change those. We wanted to add a cap of 5 million per location. We wanted to make sure they were independently owned for Nashville-based operations only. And then I think Councilmember Johnston, you were going to share another definition of the criteria that was based on ticket sales, so that we didn't end up with, like you said, bars that have stage.
Yep.
And then I think Sarah Finley wanted to add the not being in violation of Metro Health orders.
Yes. Do you want me to email?
And we're not finalizing the entire resolution. We're just making this motion to make it specific to music venues.
Right. Do you want me to email you my language? I can read it to everyone again so that we can sort of be in agreement, and because it's a little long.
Right.
So it's locally owned facility, primarily used for live music entertainment. Concert tickets, admissions, and or cover charges are integral to and required for entry at least 50% of the time the facility is open to the public. Other ancillary services, including alcohol, food, merchandise, are subsidiary or dependent upon live music performances.
I don't know if that last bullet point would knock anyone out or just cause a problem.
Well,
if somebody had a private
it would knock
event,
out restaurants and bars that have a stage that are typically looked at as that's a bar, but they can say, well, we have a stage and we have live music, so we are a venue, you know. That's not what we're trying to target. So that's why I had that in there. But if y'all disagree with that, then I mean, that's fine. These are just suggestions on how to narrow in our independently owned venues, period.
I actually think it's important to do that because every place has a stage in Nashville. There's somebody playing everywhere. And if that's considered a venue, then we're going to have a lot of people we didn't probably intend applying for this. And some of our venues that we are trying to identify and to support will not get access.
okay. Councilmember Johnston, if you want to send that, will you make sure that you copy Alex?
Yep, I'm in the process right now.
Awesome. All right, so we're on the motion to narrow this to our music venues. We have a motion, a properly second. Is there any other discussion before we take a vote? Okay, so all in favor of narrowing this resolution to music
Just a
venues?
reminder that we need to do a roll call vote for this. Just a reminder
Okay.
about that.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that. Okay, if we're ready for that, I will do that then. Councilmember Sepulveda,
Aye.
Councilmember Gamble,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnston,
Aye.
Sean Henry,
Aye.
Junad,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Vonda,
Aye.
Representative Love,
Aye.
and Edward.
Aye.
Great, thank you all. So we will, then that will allow us, I think, to fine tune the rest of the resolution as we now have passed that this will be for music venues specifically, and perhaps then that changes our wording from performing arts organizations to music venues. Okay, so was there anything else? Councilmember Johnston, I think that was one thing. I think that covers the one thing that you wanted added. Was there anything else in the draft resolution?
Not to me. I felt like that it was pretty well written, and just adding what Sarah said about not being in violation, and then just I really wanted to hone in on further defining or narrowing our scope, and so I think we've done that.
Mary Jo, I think you mentioned music venues. I think we might want to say live music venues, just because they're places that spin tapes. And so.
Sure thing.
And maybe even independent live music venues, if it's not somewhere else. I mean, I know Alex is getting a ton of information, and how he's going to compile it we'll see. Good luck, Alex.
Yeah, if you all want independent and live added, I'd ask that you make another motion to amend that, just because that's different than the motion you all just voted on.
Oh, okay. I thought we had included that. Let's do that again. So does somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we further define the venues to be independent live music venues that operate in Davidson County.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on that? Okay, sounds like we are ready for a vote. Let's see, we'll go back through our roll call. So again, we are voting on adding independently owned live music venues for operations in Davidson County. Motion was properly made and seconded. Councilmember Sepulveda?
Aye.
Councilmember Gamble?
Aye.
Member Johnston?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Junad?
Aye.
Sarah? Probably on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, sorry, aye.
Thank you. Vonda?
Aye.
Representative Love? And Edward?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've added that to our resolution. All right, Alex, what are the chances of a quick turnaround of a revised draft for people to look at on the screen?
I can take a stab at it, but I'm going to be mentally absent from your next discussion. So feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll work on the old draft.
Okay. Does that work for the committee? Until we see that update, we'll start our discussion on the second resolution.
Yes.
Okay. So that one will just sit on hold for a minute. Then we have our second resolution for $3 million. And I apologize, I did not catch that we originally had left out the Entrepreneur Center. So make sure you're looking at the, I think I just sent it like 5 minutes before we got on our call, was the most recent draft, which has all of our proposed funding in it.
I'd like to motion an amendment to the draft and looking at your previous draft and agreeing with many of the sentiments expressed by the committee. I think we need to increase the number of grant funds available. And that $600 number would increase it to 1.9 million. So I'm proposing that we change the amount for the Nashville Business Incubation Center, that 600,000, change that to 300,000. I think the 600,000, they were going to be able to serve 150 businesses. I think if we change that to 300,000, that'll change that to 75 or 80 businesses, but then allow the other 300,000 for Entrepreneur Center, which according to their proposal, I think the 600,000 would allow them to serve 500 businesses, but so that would bring them down to about 250 businesses. But it would be able to increase the amount of grant funding, which I think we all agree we need to do. It's particularly in light of, since we're directing ancillary businesses from the music venues and others to qualify under this particular small business resolution.
Okay, I'm gonna have you walk me through the numbers again. So we have in section 1, let me go right to section 2. Section 2 is the 100,000 to the Nashville Area Chamber. Section 4 is 200,000 to Conexión Americas. Section 6 is 600,000 to Nashville Incubation Center. Section 8 is 600,000 to the Nashville Entrepreneur Center. And section 10 is 1.5 million, which is the combination of 200,000 in technical assistance and 1.3 million in grants to Pathway Lending, for a total of 3 million.
Correct. So what I'm proposing is that we decrease the amount of funding for the Nashville Business Incubation Center to 300,000. Decrease the Entrepreneur Center, because they're mainly providing sustainability services, and that's another thing I want to change. I think in one area we call it capacity number, in section 7, number 1, instead of capacity building, sustainability building services. But if they're providing the sustainability services, and then at $300,000 level, and then increase the grant amount to 1.9 million.
I think that free up. Okay. Yep, I'm with you. Okay, so.
And I'd like to open that up to discussion.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a second. And so now let's open the floor up to discussion on that.
So this is Ed. I mean, I personally, again, I will say I am a fan of increasing the amount of funding that's available via Pathways. I honestly don't know if I would take money out of one pocket to put in the other in terms of what's been presented here. I feel like our level of discussion and what was presented to us on Thursday was fairly compelling as to why we needed to provide the amount of funding that we did for the businesses. And I also feel like if all of these organizations are going to, again, adhere to reporting to us about the utilization of those funds, I think it would be I think it would be almost best served to allocate the funds to them and then monitor them, because that's kind of been our common practice, before we would reduce what we've committed to them in a way that may cause businesses that may want to be served in that manner unable to be served in that manner. But I will say, if the motion was divided into two, I would support increasing the funding, hands down. But I'm not sure, and I'll listen for more discussion, but I'm not sure if I would necessarily support reducing funds from the Entrepreneur Center and the Business Incubation Center.
I tend to agree with that. I think one of the most important uses of the CARES Act funding is going to be supporting our small businesses. And so I would be in favor of increasing the grant amount significantly, actually. I understand we have the ability to add to those funds later on based off of the infrastructure that we are providing with Conexion, a big incubation center, and chamber, and so on and so forth. And so I would be in favor of that, of keeping the funding for the individual organizations the same and just increasing this total allocation to 3.5 million or even 4 to really bolster that grant funding availability.
I think that one of the things that we talked about last week was the fact that we did think that we would need to revisit and increase this amount, but we also know that there are some moving pieces at the state level that may or may not come through in a way that could be helpful to some of these same organizations. So, I might suggest that we keep the funding at the various organizations to try to reach out and touch as many businesses as possible with support. And it's sort of a random thing, but just I think from just an optics standpoint, I think we need to have at least 2 million of grant funding. I don't know that we necessarily need to go up higher than that right now, but it just seems odd to me to, as I said before, to say 2 million for music venues and less than that for everything else. That just strikes me as a curious prioritization. I think that we want to couple whatever we make, whatever grant we suggest, with a statement that we want to continue to monitor and find ways to support small businesses in the future. So to flag that this is not sort of it for small businesses.
I will flag for you that the state has said that on September 25th, that's the last date that businesses have to get the funding for this last 2 rounds that they've done. So there's still money available up until that point, and that would give you some more time to see how that money is spent, who's taking it, and who's selling it.
This is odd. I agree with Sarah 100% and tried to make that point at the meeting last week that we ought to do the same for small businesses that we're doing for the venues. It seems to me that we're kind of dealing with a dual track kind of issue here. One is we want to give businesses the ability to have to do some longer term planning to retool, repurpose, but then also there is an incredible need for just grant assistance to help keep businesses open right now. And I've found that the grants being given by the state on kind of like when you break it down on a kind of a per business basis are meager, for lack of a better word. And the more we can assist there, I think the better. So I think my preference would be to keep the funding the same for the individual organizations and just increase the grant amount to at least what we're doing for the venues.
One of the most important things that all of these other organizations can do is to educate as many businesses as possible on other resources that are available to them. And to me, that's kind of something, especially with an upcoming deadline, is really important for them to communicate about effectively, because I think we've learned from some of the presentations we've had that small businesses really don't know what they are or are not eligible for.
Okay, so I know we told Alex he could take a mental break from this part of the decision discussion. So I don't know if we have them, but I think we have an open motion to reduce the funding for NBIC and NEC from 600 to 300, and we are now in discussion of that. And so I think we need to vote on that motion, and it sounds like we might have a new motion to come after that. I don't know if Alex can correct me.
Can we, Mary Jo, can we just, I don't want to offend Councilwoman Gamble, but can we move her motion to the table so we don't have to?
I'll just rescind my motion, and then
Okay.
we can go with a new motion.
Okay.
So at that point, with that motion rescinded, I would make a motion to increase the grant funding allocation from 1.3 to 2.2, good grief, to 2 million
Okay.
even, for a total allocation of 3.7, right?
3.7. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Math early in the morning.
On a Monday morning. Okay. So we have a new motion on the floor. Does anybody want to second that before we discuss?
Second.
Okay, so now that motion, which is to leave the funding to the individual organizations the same as in our draft, but to increase the total grant funds that would be available from 1.3 to 2 million. Is there any discussion on that piece of it?
Yes. Do we want to accordingly adjust the percentage, so to speak, that's allocated for micro businesses?
Yes. So
Because with the 1.3,
I
there was
think
400,000.
Right, unless somebody tells me we can't do that. I think that's a good point. I didn't provide a lot of detail, but I think you could see it in the two versions of the resolution. And we did it in a second version because it didn't come up until after the motion had passed. But for efficiency of conversation, the intention was to make sure that a portion of the total grants were available for micro. The thought there, as requested, was it's often our micro businesses that might not have their financials in place. They might not be ready or aware to apply for the grant funds as quickly, and then the small businesses may actually get in there first, and we didn't want them to completely deplete the fund. So that was why there would be a separate set aside. The second piece that you saw in 5 under, I think it was section 11.
Section 9.
Oh, sorry.
But if I could speak to that, I tried to communicate that during our last meeting, the importance of identifying the micro businesses as a separate target, just to try to avoid what happened with federal and state funding, where by the time the smaller businesses got to the table, the money was gone. It was depleted by the larger businesses. So trying to avoid that, have a set aside for those micro businesses. And then also in response to the Our Fair Share survey that identified the need to address minority businesses that are a large segment of the business community that has left out of the PPP and other federal loan and grant programs, making sure that we set aside, or making sure that we address or identify those businesses as well as being included in this grant allocation. So putting a 30%, which I think in the state information, they identified about a 30% minority and women-owned businesses. So setting aside the 30% specifically for minority businesses as identified in the Our Fair Share report.
Any other thoughts on that?
I would agree with Councilwoman Gamble that we do need to set aside that amount. I think that's fair. I also want to reiterate that we keep getting questions about Our Fair Share, and I think going going into tomorrow's council meeting and into actually the committee meetings today, later today, we're gonna need to share that with the council members. At some point, they're gonna tell us, well, I'm not comfortable voting for this unless we see the report.
I agree.
Yeah.
Just as a point of clarification, Councilmember Gamble, when we say the minority-owned business, is that to include women or minority-owned?
The report doesn't specify gender, it just specifies minority.
Okay.
So it would be minority.
I have a few other comments on the resolution, but they're not related to that point, which I'm supportive of. So let others comment on this particular point.
Is there any other discussion? It sounds like perhaps there's agreement, so we're okay with that statement. So Edward, you had brought up the fact of, do we want to adjust that? You know, if we're at 2 million for the total fund of grants, 30% for the micro businesses would be 600,000. So we would be changing the statement in number 5 to be a provision of $2 million, ensuring that 600,000 of the total grant fund is set aside for micro businesses with an annual gross receipts of $250,000 or less, and in accordance with Equity Alliance's Our Fair Share report, ensuring that a minimum of 3% of the total grant fund is distributed to minority-owned businesses. Any questions?
I'm fine.
Does that seem to make sense? And just for clarity, the 30% is of the total 2 million. So there may be more, you know, minority-owned small businesses versus micro or vice versa. We weren't really trying to say which bucket it had to come out of, just the 30% total. Okay, so I think we're good with that. Were there any? So we have, let me make sure, we have an open motion to increase the funding to 2 million. We've talked about this additional provision being included regarding our micro businesses, along with, you see the criteria in A, B, C, and D. Those were all from our original motion passed. I think we've had all the discussion. Are there any other questions or discussion? So then I guess we'll do a roll call vote for that, all in favor of increasing it to 2 million with those other recommendations.
And Mary Jo, just to clarify, more specific comments we're going to deal with after this vote.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
This is just to increase that grant fund to 2 million and have those additional qualifications.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Sepulveda. Councilmember Gamble.
Aye.
Daddy,
The phone dead.
Oh, no.
are you on me? I couldn't hear.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Aye.
Sean.
Yes.
Junad. Maybe still on mute.
Oh, is it me?
Yes.
Hi. Sorry.
It's all right. Sarah. I think we've got you on mute. There we go.
Yes.
Thank you. Vonda.
Yes.
Representative Love.
Aye.
And Edward.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all. So that passes. We're at $2 million. Okay. And I believe there were some other questions on some of the other pieces of the resolution. So Sarah, I think you had a couple questions if you want to start us.
Yeah, just a few things. First of all, I don't know exactly how we approach this, but I do think it's only fair to exclude from eligibility for this resolution anyone that's applied under the music venue resolution. So I don't know how we approach that, but I do think that's probably something we want to be clear about. The second thing is in section 3 about the Nashville area chamber. I think that we might want to be clear that we don't want to condition the support on being a member of the chamber. I think they made it clear that they were in this pandemic trying to offer support services for businesses regardless of whether they actually were members. And so I thought that might be a helpful thing to encourage that.
I agree with that.
Yeah, the other thing is the same as Councilwoman Sepulveda's comment. I've certainly gotten requests from various organizations for a copy of this Our Fair Share report because it was provided to us in confidence. I have not shared it because it's preliminary, but I don't think we can keep relying on it and not make it available to the public. I think the in section 5 about the various conditions in D, I think we need to change the language. It says has not been convicted of more than one instance. Convicted is, I mean, I hate to be too lawyeristic about it, but that's kind of a criminal trial concept. I think what we want to say is you haven't been cited for violating our safety orders. And then I also wanted to raise the issue of demographic data. I know we've gone to a lot of lengths to make sure that we weren't trying to get individual social security numbers and such. I don't think that's implicated here with these businesses, but I just want to make sure that we're not being too broad by saying that data can be collected if there are any exclusions that we should be clear about. But I'll defer to others on that.
Great. I see that Alex is off mute, so I bet he is available to maybe address the health order violations and make sure that we get that wording right. Alex, did you want to clarify where we were going with cited versus convicted and why? Alex, do we have you?
He wasn't joking about being gone.
Oh, he's having technical issues.
I was like, he is really focused on that other resolution.
Yeah, because I'm seeing it coming off. All right, well, we'll give him a chance.
Can I address a couple of comments that Sarah made, because I think her comments are aligned with some that I had. I think the first one that I wanted to address, Sarah, I think is somewhat the overlap between the venues and this one. I had a similar feeling, but then I kind of withdrew that because I feel like maybe some of the venue owners as businesses may want to receive some of the support services that are provided by some of these other organizations to where the point that they're not excluded. I don't think that it should be excluded there. Perhaps the intent is that they are not also recipients of the grant distributions. But maybe not completely excluded from everything in the resolution. I
totally agree. That was actually my
Yeah.
intent. I wasn't very clear in how I said that, but I was just talking about the grant funds.
And my other comment, and please jump in if I'm reading this wrong, but I know what we have done with even just the other resolution is with the grants. I don't believe that we laid out, at least not in the one I'm looking at, unless it's an older version, where there's a maximum amount for organizations. I know we have a threshold for who qualifies to get grants from pathways, but I don't see rationale around the size of the grants.
Yeah,
It was left out. It was left out. It was a cap of 10,000 for the businesses $1 million or less, and 5,000 for the micro business.
Yep.
You're right.
Great catch. Sorry. That should be under 5, where we have the existence. In existence for 12 months, the minimum. We need to add, I guess, perhaps in E, maximum grant of 10,000 for small businesses under 1 million and 5,000 for micro businesses under 250. Yeah, thank you for that.
That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Mary Jo, the list that legal provided, they called it businesses that they filed civil warrants on.
Let's see. Alex, I see you're on green. Are you able to, can we hear you now? Oh, we hear you. Oh, you went muted again.
I'm here now. You got me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, it feels like a council meeting. Okay. So I wanted to step in real quick on the cited versus convicted issue. That was my legalese. The reason I say that is because my team is actually, in our department, is actually responsible for the prosecution of these citations, and it's a bit of a moving target. On originally, what would happen is we would do a citation directly from the health department. But this has morphed over time as we've kind of grown as Metro and how we issue violations of these health orders. We now do citations, we do warrants. It's not just the health department doing them, the police do them, transportation, licensing, a couple other different departments. And we actually have pending legislation before council to expand the authority to issue violations to other Metro employees. And so the problem with having just a venue being cited or just a business being cited is that there are so many different people who are issuing citations that many of them will be issued inadvertently for incorrectly, like someone might not have actually violated, or it might be that they didn't actually get a warning. So you might have a situation where, a manager steps back in the back and their employee takes down their mask, and they shouldn't have done that, but they end up getting a citation for it. Because we have so many different people in Metro responsible for issuing citations, there are going to be some that are improperly issued or that are maybe too hastily issued. And that's usually taken care of in the court setting where we would dismiss those as the prosecutors. But some of these venues, some of these businesses are just going to say, you know what, it's not worth paying a lawyer to go into court. I'm just going to pay the $50 fine, even though this might not have been a perfect citation. And then they would be deemed ineligible for these funds. So I want to make sure everybody understands that there's just a lot. We're growing, we're learning as Metro and how we prosecute these. But the issuing of a citation does not mean necessarily that these venues or businesses are guilty of some type of violation. There are going to be some errors in the process.
Yeah. Alex, in terms of a conviction process that involves the courts, is that the kind of thing that realistically would be determined before all this money has to be spent anyway? Because usually those kinds of things take time.
Some of them have. I can remember a conviction could just be you paying your fine. So, because that's going to be essentially treated as an admission of guilt. You're saying, hey, listen, it's like you get a parking ticket. If you go ahead and throw in the $25 to the Traffic and Licensing Commission for your ticket, it's essentially an admission of guilt, which I think would constitute a conviction for purposes of this. Yes, there are a lot of these cases that have been worked out in environmental court already. There's a lot of different warrants that people have pled guilty to, or we've made some type of deal with them, but ultimately those count as convictions, I would think, under this.
Hey, Alex, this is Sean. Are there levels of convictions or infractions? I mean, as you cited, for an employee to be out back with the mask off, it's a simple infraction, easily corrected, but it's not indicative of a business doing the wrong thing. Are there levels above that, or is it all the same, whether it be a mask off or trying to overload your capacity, trying to do certain things just to drive revenue?
I think that's a great question. They're all just listed as citations or violations of the health order. So there's no level. Like if you refuse to participate, like if you're serving food from the bar or serving alcohol from the bar, which is a pretty major violation, it's still just a violation of a health order. The same way that refusal to wear a mask on the street for an individual is a violation of a health order. And we've got a lot of different ways that we're trying to eat this elephant, right? We're trying to do it administratively through beer board citations where we affect your licensure to sell beer, We're trying to affect it by going out to restaurants, saying you're over capacity here in violation of a health order. We're trying to get it by getting at single instances at restaurants where we observe an employee not wearing a face mask. So there's a lot of, that's why I try to be broad in the language I use to include administrative remedies. And the reason I chose the language I did is because I wanted it to be clear that it would be separate instances of conduct that resulted in something. So if let's say you are a bar and you had a violation, well, you could get a beer board citation for that, and you could also get a Metro citation for that. And you'd be kind of put in two different violations for the same conduct, which doesn't seem to be what you're necessarily aiming at. So if you're trying to aim at people who have done something, been cited, done it again, and been cited, that's part of the language that I use.
Hey, Alex, is it possible, just given sort of these restrictions, if we had someone that really just flagrantly stayed open and created like a super spreader event, we obviously wouldn't like to have grants going to that organization. Is there a way to just kind of leave it, instead of you have to be convicted of more than one, is there a way just to say that we can pathway lending can take into consideration any citations considered so that they can look at it in context?
I'm sorry, for some reason my phone's cutting out on it.
Yeah, Sarah, we lost you.
What I was wondering is whether we could provide some sort of we will consider any type of citation can be considered, so that there's a bit of discretion, because, two instances of someone not wearing a mask does not equal somebody creating a super spreader event by just ignoring, restrictions on having a bar open.
Sure.
And having more than one conviction means that we could be giving a grant to someone that really had done something flagrant. But I obviously understand from what you're saying that we don't want to have what's really sort of a very minor type of thing trigger ineligibility. So can we just make it a little bit more discretionary as a consideration for lending?
Well, you could have maybe for all the resolutions, maybe instead of prohibiting, you could say that violation of, we could eliminate the two instances and say may cause you to be ineligible for these funds, because the committee is still retaining control over any entity that receives funds. So if we put may instead of a blanket restriction against applying, if we put it may make you ineligible, then I think that would give you the ability to say, okay, we see that someone is supposed to get this grant, but they just did this super spreader event. We'd like to restrict the lending organization from giving them these funds. So maybe that's the cleaner way to do it, is to put it in there as a discouragement, but make it more permissive by saying that they may have their funds removed, as opposed to you can't apply if you have multiple or a single citation.
If we do that, then we would need to give specific instructions to Pathway, just to make sure that they understand what specifically we are asking for, and make it clear to them that, they need to be aware of all of this, or we will use someone else next go around. That's just my feeling. I trust this body. I have to drop off for my staff meeting, so I just wanted y'all to be aware of that. So.
Okay. I think we can give that specific guidance to Pathway. I think they could work with our team here if they had any questions on violations. And thank you for your time this morning, Councilmember Sepulveda, if you have to drop off. Are there any other discussion items?
And I may have printed off the wrong one. Never mind. I was looking for the added language in the revised resolutions that you sent, but I must have pulled up the wrong one. So I'll go back and look at that, and just want to make sure that we in section 7, we can, number 1, change that in capacity building, sustainability services.
Okay. Okay, so when I don't, let's look at it by page to make sure that we haven't missed anything. I don't have any changes to page 1. I don't have any well, the total at the very top will say 3.7 million. Then on 2, I don't see any changes. Page 3, I think we, section 7, item 1, capacity building will be crossed out and changed to sustainability. And then the 1.5 million will go to 2.2. In 5, the provide grants will go to 2 million. The micro business goes to 600,000, defined as 250 or less. D, I think we have the revised wording that says violations of a metro emergency COVID-19 public health order may be considered towards your eligibility. We need to add E, which is a maximum of 10,000 for small business under 1 million and 5,000 for micro businesses under 250. And then I know there was some conversation as we're looking at it. We tried to say it in here, but I want to make sure we captured it to everybody's agreement that the demographics we want to capture is for the ownership of the business. So we would want to be looking at, you know, the zip code of the business, race, gender. I don't know if age is important to this committee for this purpose, but if more data is better, we can leave that. Demographic data, the violations. And then there was one other item that was suggested. I want to make sure we get in there, which is probably in number 5, maybe we need to add number or letter F, which is precluding additional grant funds for those that have already received funding through our music venue support. I think that was suggested. Were there any other items of conversation that we did not capture?
Mary Jo, I just got one, and this is kind of a goofy thing, but it's I think it's important. It's a whereas clause, and it's a point that I made at the meeting last week. We have a whereas clause that says that the committee desires to work with the chambers of commerce. I think really the point of that was to say that we're asking the entities that we're providing this money to work with the chambers of commerce to just maximize the outreach to different parts of the community. So I might kind of shift the tenor of that to have it be after the clause where we list the entities we're going to rely on and encourage them to work with those chambers, because we just want to make sure that all sorts of different constituencies are used to maximize the number of businesses that know what's happening.
So is the desire, and if that's the right word or not, to have the funded organizations work with the chambers?
That was actually the point that
yeah,
I had intended last week. I mean, obviously open to other people's comments, but my thought was just that we wanted to encourage them to work with the local chambers to try to make sure that we maximize the outreach efforts.
Okay, I like that. So I think it says, whereas the committee encourages the funded, or do we need to say the organizations funded?
Yeah, I would just say these entities after the whereas clause where we list them.
Oh, up above?
Yeah, so you have a whereas clause based on the urgency with which these funds must be distributed. That one? You see that? It's like the third from the bottom.
Okay,
says-
yes.
Yeah, I would just add a whereas clause after that that says, whereas the committee encourages these entities, because that's how you've referred to them before.
Okay, so I was up, so on page 1, the second whereas from the bottom has about the chambers.
Mhm.
But you're saying move that below to after, and that it's really that we encourage the above entities to work with the chambers.
Correct, because I don't think that we as a committee are really doing anything separate with them.
Agreed. Agreed.
I've made that change on my end, so we're good on that.
Okay. And we talked about adding the exclusion funding. Are there any other, Alex, if you're okay with this, it seems like we've all agreed upon the changes, and if we saw the new format, we could make the motion on the revised draft.
Yeah, one other thing, I think Sarah had mentioned to put in something about not having to be a member of the chamber, so that would need to be added also.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the committee is fine to vote on this without having to see the red line language, since you're specific on it, and just if you trust that we will make these changes as you've designated them, then I think you're good on the motion.
Excellent. Would the committee like me to run through the changes then one more time and then somebody can make the motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the changes that we have, I'm going to kind of go by page. So page 1, we are increasing the total to 3.7 million. We are going to move the second from the last whereas and change that to encouraging the entities to work with the chambers. And that will go below the second whereas on page 2. In section 3, we will ensure that membership to the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce is not a requirement to serve those businesses. On page 3, under section 7.1, we are going to change capacity building to sustainability. We will, in section 10, increase the total funding to pathway lending at 2.2 million. In section 5 on page 4, that 2 million will be the grant fund, 600 to micro businesses. We are going to adjust letter D to indicate that the violation of a Metro Health emergency COVID-19 public health order may be considered in your eligibility. We will add E, which is a maximum of 10,000 for small businesses under 1 million, 5,000 for micro businesses under 250. And letter F to exclude funding for those who have already received funding through Metro's music venue grant fund. And that is all. Those are the changes I have.
In letter F, when you're excluding funding, do we need to say that they are still encouraged to, or maybe not encouraged, but they're still allowed to apply for support services through the different venues, or is that implied? Because you're just excluding grant funding from.
No, it's a good question. It's only under 5, which is specific to the grant funds. But if we want to be specific, that's.
I say to reduce the ambiguity of it, I would say that they're excluded from further grant funding with this, but that the support services are, available through the different organizations.
Okay, but not the technical support as we've been referring to it.
Right.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we accept those changes.
Seconded.
All right. Any other discussion on those changes? All right. Then we will go back to a roll call to vote on what we're calling resolution number 2, as we just discussed the changes. Let's see. I think we've lost Councilmember Sepulveda, so we'll go to Councilmember Gamble.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnston.
Aye.
Sean.
Aye.
Junad.
Aye.
Sarah.
Aye.
Vonda. Representative Love. Do I still have Representative Love? Maybe on mute. Yes, muted. Representative Love, if you can hear us. I'm going to go on to Edward. Edward, I saw you go green, but I didn't hear you. There you go.
Apologies. Aye.
Thank you. Okay. We have the votes. So that resolution 2 passes with all of our changes. And then I did send out the updated, thank you, Alex. We did not take the vote for resolution 1 yet with our changes. So you can see in red where we have updated.
One thing I missed, in the caption, I'll change that to eliminating performance arts and making it just live music venues. So ignore the caption part. I'll get that right.
Okay. And so then on page 1, we see in the whereas that we changed that to live music venues. Again, in the second, or I'm going through the red marks that you see. So we, again, changed it to live music venues throughout. Then on page 2, under section 3, again, changed for live music venues. And then we get down into section 4, number 3, and then the eligible, we've got the venues must be independent, Nashville owned, primarily for live music venues. The clarification and further definition on it being a concert ticket, admission, or cover charge. And the $5 million cap, as well as on page 3, I think that needs to be E. I think at the top of the page it starts with A, but that would be E. And we will, I assume we want to adjust that to match the wording that we agreed upon about may impact your eligibility.
I actually have the language I want to use for that. We'll just, Sarah, let me know your thoughts on this. Eligible venues that have been convicted of more than one instance of conduct, or let me change that part. Eligible that have been convicted of conduct. I want to remove the more than one. So eligible venues that have been convicted of a citation, warrant, or administrative penalty for violation of a Metro Emergency COVID-19 public health order may be deemed by the committee to be ineligible to receive funds.
I think that captures it. And so those, you can see those changes in resolution 1. Oh, Sarah, you're fading.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is not operating well.
We got you now.
The eligible venues gross revenues cannot exceed $5 million during the previous 12 months. Well, given the fact that the last 6, everybody's been closed, are we really trying to get at those that in their last 12 months of actually being able to operate, or are we trying to basically include, we're going to include a lot of bigger venues, I think, if we include the last 6 months?
Yeah, and also it probably needs to be annualized revenue because, like, for example, Rudy's Jazz Room has not been open for an entire year, especially if you take out the last 6 months since they've been, or 5 months that they've been closed. So maybe that it should be annualized revenue as of February 29th, 2020. Additionally, I don't know if this is necessary or not, but we had discussed addressing each venue specifically, even though, like, for example, Marathon and Cannery they're the same company, but different leases in different actual venues. So do we need to, this is an Alex question, do we need to define that, or is that just implied because we're saying different venues instead of different companies?
I think it's implied because we limit it to venues. That's why I wrote it that way. So I think we'd be okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
And Councilmember Johnston, would you agree what we're trying to say then is 12 months of annual gross receipts for the period ended February 29th, 2020?
Yeah, but I would say annualized, because if they were only open for 6 months, before that, and they made, whatever, some of these businesses they weren't open all of 2019, for example.
But the cap wouldn't hurt them.
This is true. That's true.
If it was the reverse, it would. So I think we can say 12 months of annual gross receipts for the period ended February 29th, 2020.
Yep, you're right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to drop off for another meeting, but I would like to volunteer to carry the small business resolution.
The second one?
We just passed the small business.
Great.
I'll carry the music venue one if no one objects.
And was there any other discussion, or are we ready to vote on resolution number 1?
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, so I think we just need a motion to bring it forward. I think we've had our conversation, but we don't have a motion, so.
Yep, just all of what you said, so moved, if that works.
Does a second?
Second.
I think.
And then is there any additional conversation? Okay, let's do another roll call vote then. Can I start with you, Councilmember Gamble, and we'll let you drop.
Aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
Aye.
We still have Sean Henry.
Aye.
Thank you. Todd?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Is that me?
No, I'm at Vonda McDaniel.
Okay.
Still have Vonda? She may have had to drop. Okay. Representative Love?
Aye.
And Edward?
Aye.
Okay, we still have the votes to pass. Thank you all. All right, I have one other important
May I
question.
ask a parliamentary question?
Yes.
I was unable to unmute on the small business resolution. Is it possible to list me as supporting that?
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We have both resolutions with our final changes and unanimously voted on. So thank you for that. And the next question is probably a little bit easier, which is schedules for Thursday. As we head into Labor Day weekend, are we meeting? Are we passing?
I apologize. I'm gonna have to jump off in a moment, but Sean, I can't make it Thursday if we're doing it in person. So I apologize in advance.
No
and I'll be at my mother's on Thursday. So if we're doing it this way, her Wi-Fi is somewhat dated. So putting it
You've got mail?
Yeah. Yeah, the dial up.
I think we've heard of a couple other conflicts and recommended that we not have a meeting this Thursday, but pick it back up on the following Thursday, which is, let me get the date right, the 10th. Does anybody have any issue with not meeting on Thursday the 3rd?
No.
And then I will reach out to each of you as far as content for the 10th on what we want to start addressing next.
Great. Well, thank you all. Have a great weekend and Labor Day.
Thank you all. Thanks. We are adjourned. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.